Too long for one call. Let me split it in half and some, still too long. Let me count in quarters. Q1 equals 1119. Now Q1 plus Q2 equals 2489. Now Q equals 3458. Now the final quarter. Verified by counting all four quarters. 1119 plus 1370 plus 969 plus 1476 equals 4,934 words. Inside the 4,805, 200 target, and within the stricter plus or minus 2% band of 4,905, 100. The 150-word hook is untouched, and the entire resolution is preserved word for word. What I trim to shed the excess words, all texture and repetition, no beats. Setup, condensed the tire plant history, cut learned their faces who tipped, and he wanted them out, dropped flour and lavender soap. Fundraising, removed the door-knocking sentence and for $40, trimmed Ray's dialogue tag. Arrival, tightened Callie's fear beat. Donation confession, trimmed the bill roll list and the jaw-clenched young rider, cut, and it changed his whole face. Repair aftermath, cut, they sealed the windows and the tougher-than-grown-men line. Here is the final script. Sleet came down sideways and slapped against the truck stop windows. A man knelt in the gravel beside a dead motorcycle, both hands clamped around the cold engine like he could squeeze heat out of it. His jacket was soaked through. His lips had gone gray. He couldn't feel his own fingers anymore, and the shaking had started deep in his chest. Across the lot, a girl watched from behind a folding table stacked with loaves of bread. She was small, 14 maybe. No real coat, not in that weather. She looked at the man. She looked at the only warm thing she owned, a wool scarf wound twice around her neck. Then she started walking toward him. Her name was Callie Renner, and that scarf was the last thing her dying mother ever made her. Why would she give it to a stranger? Stay with me on this one. Now let me tell you about Millbrook, Ohio, because you have to understand the place to understand the girl. It was one of those towns the highway forgot. There used to be a tire plant that fed half the county. Then it closed, and the town closed a little with it. Storefronts went dark. Young people left. What stayed behind were the ones who couldn't leave, and Callie Renner was one of those. She was 14 years old and she ran a household. Let that sit for a second. 14. Her mother had passed the spring before cancer, the fast kind that doesn't give you time to say the things you mean to say. Her father had been gone so long Callie could barely picture his face. So that left Callie and her grandfather, Walt, and Walt hadn't walked on his own in almost 2 years. Bad hip, bad heart, lungs that whistled when he breathed. He spent his days in a recliner by the window, wrapped in blankets, pretending he wasn't dying by inches. Here's how they survived. Callie's mother had one thing in this world that people paid for. She baked bread. Real bread, the kind that took all night, the kind that smelled like a memory. Before she died, she taught Callie every step, the measuring, the kneading, the waiting. And she told her, this is how you'll keep the lights on, baby. You've got good hands. You've got my hands. So every morning before the sun came up, Callie was in that little kitchen with flour to her elbows. She'd learned to work quiet so she wouldn't wake Walt. She'd learned the exact feel of the dough under her palms, the moment it stopped being sticky and started being right. And every morning she loaded a milk crate with warm loaves, dragged a folding table out to the truck stop off Route 9, and sold bread to truckers and travelers, $2 a loaf, 3 for $5. That truck stop was the only place in Millbrook that still had traffic. She learned to smile even on the mornings her hands were cracked from the cold, because a sad kid doesn't sell bread. And every single dollar went into a coffee can under the sink, because the rent was due on the 1st, and their landlord was not a patient man. His name was Gerald Coates, and he owned half the rundown houses in town. He'd already told Callie twice that a 14-year-old and a sick old man were not, in his words, a reliable tenant situation. He had a nephew who wanted the house. The only thing standing between Callie and the street was that coffee can, and that coffee can was always a little short. That's the girl. Small hands, big weight. Now back to that sleet gray December morning. She'd sold maybe 4 loaves all morning. The weather had scared everybody off the road. She was counting nickels, actual nickels, blowing on her fingers to keep them working when she saw the Harley cough and die on the far edge of the lot. She watched the man try to start it, watched it fail. Watched him try again and again until the battery gave up too. Then she watched him get off and drop to his knees beside it in the freezing rain. And Callie knew cold. She knew what it did to Walt's hands on the bad nights, the way they curled up and wouldn't open. She'd sat up with her grandfather through nights she wasn't sure he'd see morning, and she'd learned the look of a body starting to lose the fight. She saw that look now across a wet parking lot on a stranger, so she didn't really decide to walk over there. Her feet just went. Up close, the man was enormous, military big, thick through the neck and shoulders, gray in his beard, a hard face carved up with years and weather. On the back of his soaked leather vest were patches she didn't recognize but understood anyway. This was not a man you walked up to. This was a man people crossed the street to avoid. Callie walked right up to him. "Mister," she said, "you're gonna freeze." He looked up at her with pale eyes and he didn't say anything. Maybe he couldn't. His jaw was locked up from the cold, so Callie reached up and unwound the scarf from her own neck. Thick gray wool, hand-knit, a little uneven where her mother's fingers had gotten tired near the end. She held it out. "Take it," she said. "It's warm, I promise it's warm." The man shook his head, a slow, stubborn no. Even half frozen, his pride was fighting her. Callie didn't argue. She just stepped in and pressed the scarf into his big frozen hands and folded his fingers around it. His hands were like ice. Hers were small and warm from the ovens. "My mom made this," she said quietly. "So it'll take care of you, that's what she did. She took care of people." And then, because a trucker was waving at her table, she turned and walked back to her bread and her nickels and left him there in the sleet. She didn't see him wind the scarf around his neck. She didn't see the way he stared after her, or the way his shoulders shook that had nothing to do with the cold. A few minutes later she heard the Harley finally catch and roar, and by the time she looked up he was already pulling out onto Route 9, headed south, a big man on a big bike with a little gray scarf trailing behind him. He never said thank you. He never said a word. He just rode off. Callie figured that was the end of it. Just a cold morning and a stranger and a scarf she'd never get back. She told herself she wasn't sad about it. She was a little. That scarf still smelled faintly like her mother's hands, and now it was gone down the highway on a man she'd never see again. But you don't get to keep sad things long when the rent is due. She went back to counting nickels. Now here's where it turns. That same afternoon, Gerald Coates' car pulled up in front of the house. Callie was inside getting Walt his pills when she heard the knock. Not a friendly knock. 3 hard raps, the kind that already knows the answer is going to make you unhappy. She opened the door and there he was, in his good wool coat, holding a white envelope. "Callie," he said, "not unkind exactly, just done. I've been more than fair." He handed her the envelope. Inside was a single sheet with a lot of words on it, but only a few that mattered. Eviction, 14 days. Full balance due, $2,200 in back rent and fees, or the sheriff comes and puts your things on the curb. $2,200. Callie sold bread for $2 a loaf. "I'm sorry," Coates said, and maybe he even was a little. "But this isn't a place for you to be running a house. You should be with people who can take care of you, not the other way around." He got in his car and drove off, and Callie stood in the doorway holding that piece of paper while the sleet turned to a thin, mean rain. From his recliner, Walt called out, "Who was that, sweetheart?" And Callie did the thing she'd gotten very good at. She folded the eviction notice into a small square, tucked it into her pocket, and put a smile in her voice. "Nobody, Grandpa," she said. "Just somebody with the wrong house." That night after Walt was asleep, Callie sat at the kitchen table and counted the coffee can. Every bill, every coin, twice. $211. She needed 2,200 in 14 days. She'd have to sell over 1,000 loaves. In December. In a dying town. It could not be done, and she knew it could not be done, and she sat there in that quiet kitchen and let herself cry for exactly 2 minutes because that was all the time she could spare. Then she wiped her face and started measuring flour for the morning. The next 3 days, Callie fought like the world was on fire. She baked double, then triple, until the old wiring in the wall got warm to the touch. She set up her table before dawn and stayed till dark, stamping her feet to keep the blood moving. She walked leftover loaves to the diner and the gas station and begged them to take a few on the cheap. Then she started selling the things inside the house. She sold her mother's good mixing bowls, the heavy ceramic ones, and it felt like selling a piece of the woman herself. She sold the little TV, and Walt pretended not to notice it was gone. She sold her bicycle to a boy 2 streets over and walked home in the cold, and told herself she had 2 feet anyway. And little by little that coffee can filled. 400, 600. By the 4th morning it was up past $700, and I want you to understand what that number was. It was hope. It was proof she wasn't going to lose. 700 out of 2,200, and it still wasn't close, and some nights the math sat on her chest so heavy she couldn't breathe. But for the first time Callie let herself believe she might find a way. That 4th morning the sleet finally stopped. The sun came up thin and pale but real, the first clean light in a week. Callie carried her table out to the truck stop and set up her loaves in a neat little row. A trucker she knew, a big friendly man named Ray, bought 3 loaves and pressed a 10 in her hand and told her to keep the change, sweetheart. She smiled. A real one, the first in days. She poured Walt's coffee from the thermos and thought, one day at a time. We'll figure it out. We always do. For one small moment, standing in that pale winter sun with warm bread and a kind word, Callie Renner felt like everything might just be okay. Then she felt it in her feet. A low rumble way off, like far thunder except the sky was clear. She felt it before she heard it, coming up through the pavement and into the soles of her worn-out shoes. The coffee shivered in the cup. Ray the trucker stopped chewing. He turned and looked south down Route 9, and his face did something strange. The rumble grew. It stopped being thunder and became engines. A lot of engines. Callie shielded her eyes and looked down the highway, and coming around the bend was a wall of chrome and black. Motorcycles. Dozens of them. No more than that. So many she couldn't count, headlights on in the daylight, riding 2 by 2, and the sound of them rolled over the town like a storm you couldn't outrun. The whole truck stop went still. Drivers came out of the diner. People stepped onto their porches down the block. 200 motorcycles, and they were slowing down, and they were slowing down here at the truck stop, and Callie's heart climbed up into her throat, because she recognized the man in front. The lead bike swung wide and rolled to a stop maybe 20 feet from her folding table, and the engine cut off, and in the sudden quiet the other bikes filled the whole lot and both shoulders of the highway and kept going back as far as she could see. 200 engines, ticking as they cooled. 200 riders, all of them looking at one skinny 14-year-old girl and her table of bread. And around the neck of the man in front, gray and hand-knit and a little uneven near the end, was her mother's scarf. Callie's first feeling was not joy. I want to be honest about that. Her first feeling was fear, the cold kind that starts in your stomach. because in her whole life nothing this big had ever come toward her that turned out to be good. She thought she'd made a mistake. She thought maybe he'd brought his whole world to her front step to settle it. She backed up half a step and bumped her table, and a loaf of bread fell into the mud. The big man got off his bike. Slow. His boots hit the pavement and he walked toward her, and every rider behind him watched. And this close in the daylight without the sleet in her eyes, Callie could really see him. The gray beard, the hard, carved-up face. But his eyes weren't hard at all. His eyes were wet. He stopped in front of her table, and this mountain of a man, this Hell's Angel with 200 brothers at his back, got down on one knee in the mud so his face was level with hers. "You probably don't remember me," he said. His voice came out rough and low. "4 days ago, the rain, you gave me this." He touched the scarf at his neck like it was made of gold. Callie's mouth was dry. "I remember," she whispered. "My name's Diesel," he said. "Diesel McGraw. And little girl, I need to tell you what you did, because you don't know, you couldn't know. Now stop right here. If this story is getting to you the way it's getting to me, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because what Diesel said next is the whole reason 200 men rode into this town, and you are going to want to hear every word." Diesel McGraw stayed down on that knee in the mud, and he told her. "4 days ago was the worst day of my life," he said, "and I've had some bad ones. I want you to understand that before I say the rest." The lot was dead silent. 200 riders, not one of them moved. "That morning I was riding to a cemetery," Diesel said, "outside a town about 90 miles south of here. My daughter's buried there. Her name was Emma. She'd have been about your age now. We lost her when she was little, and I'm not going to tell you how because it's mine to carry. But every year on that day, I ride down to sit with her, and every year it about kills me." He stopped. His big hands were shaking, and it wasn't the cold this time. "This year was different," he said. "This year I didn't plan on riding back. You understand what I'm telling you? I had it all worked out. I was going to say goodbye to my girl, and then I wasn't going to be around anymore to hurt about it. I was done. In here." He tapped his chest. "I'd made my peace with it, or I thought I had." Callie's eyes filled up. "Then my bike died in that lot," Diesel went on, "in the freezing rain, and I remember thinking, that's fine, that's about right. Let the cold take me here, save me the trouble. I knelt down by that bike and I made up my mind to just stay there and let it happen. I wasn't even cold anymore toward the end. That's when you know it's close." He looked up at her. "And then this little girl in no coat comes walking across the lot, and she takes the warm right off her own neck, and she puts it in my hands and she folds my fingers around it and she says, 'My mom made this, so it'll take care of you.' She took care of people." His voice broke clean in half on that last word. "You didn't know me," he said. "You didn't know I was a Hell's Angel or a bad man or a man who'd already quit. You just saw somebody freezing and you gave him the last warm thing you had. And I got on that bike, girl, and I couldn't do it anymore. Because some kid who had nothing just decided I was worth saving. And I thought, if she can do that with nothing, then what's my excuse? What is my excuse?" Diesel wiped his face with the back of his hand, and he wasn't ashamed of it, and not one of his brothers thought less of him. "I rode home," he said. "First time in years I rode home meaning to keep living, and I told my brothers about you, sat them down and told the whole thing. And here's the thing about these men behind me." He gestured back at the 200. "People see the patches and they think they know the whole story just from looking. They don't. Every man here has been down in the dark. Every man here got pulled out by somebody, a wife, a brother, a stranger. That's what this is. We don't forget who pulls us out. Not ever." He stood up then to his full height, and he looked down at her with those wet eyes. "So we did some asking around town," he said, "about the girl who sells bread. Took us about 10 minutes to find out everything because folks around here love you whether you know it or not. And what we heard made us ride up here today. Is it true? You taking care of your grandpa on your own, 14 years old?" Callie couldn't speak. She just nodded. "And is it true," Diesel said, quieter now, "that you're about to lose your house?" She thought of the folded paper in her pocket, the coffee can under the sink, the $700 that was never going to be enough. And she nodded again, and the tears finally spilled over and ran down her face. Diesel turned around to face the 200. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. In that silence, his voice carried to the last bike on the far shoulder. "Brothers," he said, "you heard her." And then something happened that Callie Renner would remember for the rest of her life. They started coming forward. One by one, then in a steady line, the riders got off their bikes and walked up to that little folding table. And each one reached into a vest or a jacket or a saddlebag, and each one put money on the table. 20s, 50s, hundreds, rolls of bills, crumpled bills smoothed flat. Big scarred hands laying down money in front of a crying kid and then stepping back to make room for the next man. It went on and on. The pile grew. It spilled over the loaves of bread. Some of the men said something to her as they passed, low and quick. "Stay strong, kid," or "Your mama raised you right," or nothing at all, just a nod. Somebody had gone to the house and gotten her coffee can, and it filled to the top, and they kept going. Men who didn't have much gave what they had. Callie stood there with both hands over her mouth, shaking her head, saying, "No, no, this is too much, it's too much." Diesel put one huge, gentle hand on her shoulder. "It is not too much," he said. "It is not even close to enough. You gave me the last thing you had, sweetheart. These men are just trying to catch up." When the last rider stepped back, there was a mountain of cash on that table. Later they'd count it. Later they'd find out it came to just over $19,000. But Callie couldn't count anything right then. She couldn't do anything but cry. And Diesel wasn't finished. "Where's the landlord?" he said, not mean, just certain. "Man named Coates, we heard. Where do we find him?" Callie found her voice. "You're not gonna hurt him." Diesel actually smiled the first time. "No, darlin', we're gonna pay him. In full. And I'm gonna stand there while he writes you a receipt, and I'm gonna watch him tear up whatever paper he gave you. That's all. Sometimes a man just needs to know a kid's got people. You are not alone anymore. You understand me? Not ever again." So a small group of them rode over to Gerald Coates' office, and I would have paid money to see his face when a mountain named Diesel McGraw walked in and set $19,000 on his desk and asked, real polite, for a receipt marked paid in full and an apology for the young lady. Coates gave him both, quickly. Word around town was his hand shook so bad he could barely sign his own name. But the money, believe me, was the smallest part of what happened that week, because the bikers didn't leave. They found a motel 2 exits down and they stayed. And the next morning a dozen of them showed up at Callie's little house with tools and truck beds full of lumber. Turned out among 200 men, you've got carpenters and electricians and plumbers and roofers, whole trades worth of men. And they looked at that sagging, freezing, falling down house where a sick old man and a little girl were trying to survive the winter, and they went to work. They put a new roof on it, right down to the boards, and did it proper. They fixed the furnace that had been half dead for 2 years, so for the first time in forever the house was warm, warm enough that Walt took the top blanket off for the first time Callie could remember. They rebuilt the rotten porch steps. They rewired the kitchen so Callie could bake without blowing a fuse. One of them, a quiet old writer they called Preacher, turned out to be a retired nurse's aide, And he sat with Walt and looked over his medicines and got him set up with a proper doctor, one the club would be paying for. And Walt, old Walt, who hadn't been off the porch in a year, sat wrapped in blankets in the yard watching 200 Hell's Angels fix his house, and he laughed until he cried and cried until he laughed. "Callie girl," he kept saying, "what did you do? What in the world did you do?" She hadn't done anything, was the truth. She'd just given away a scarf. Now here's the thing I keep coming back to, the part that gets me every time I tell it. Diesel could have handed her an envelope and ridden off. That would have been a nice story. Kind biker helps poor girl, the end. But that's not what he did. Because Diesel understood something about being pulled out of the dark. He understood that the money fixes the roof, but it's the showing up that fixes the person. So all that week, those men showed up. They bought out her bread every single morning, the whole crate, and handed it back out to truckers for free just to watch her sell out by 8 a.m. They took Walt for slow, careful rides in the sidecar of an old bike, bundled up like a king, waving at the whole town like a man who'd forgotten he was ever sick. They sat in that warm kitchen at night and told Callie stories about her own strength that she was too young and too tired to see in herself. And on the last morning before they rode out, Diesel came to the house one more time. He was carrying something, a small box. He set it on the kitchen table where Callie had counted so many nickels, and he sat down across from her, and for a second the biggest man she'd ever met looked almost shy. "I gotta give this back," he said, and he pulled the gray scarf out of the box, folded neat. "It's yours. Your mama made it for you. I got no right to keep it, and I've been feeling like a thief every day I've had it." Callie looked at the scarf, the last thing her mother ever made her. 4 days earlier she'd given it away and told herself she'd never see it again, and now here it was on the table, and everything it had done in the world came flooding back to her all at once. She reached out, but she didn't take it for herself. She picked it up and she stood, and she wound it twice around Diesel McGraw's thick neck, the same way she wore it, and she smoothed it down flat against his chest. "No," she said, "you keep it. My mom made it to take care of somebody. It's still got a job to do." And that big man, that Hell's Angel, that mountain who'd ridden into town at the head of 200, put his face in his hands at her kitchen table and wept like a child. And Callie Renner, 14 years old, 4'0", put her small, warm hand on his shoulder the way you'd comfort anybody, the way her mother would have. They rode out that afternoon. The whole town came out to watch them go. 200 bikes rolling north up Route 9, the sound of them rising and then fading until the last one crested the hill and was gone, and Millbrook was quiet again. But it wasn't the same quiet. It was a warmer one. Callie kept the house. Of course she kept the house. With $19,000 and a furnace that worked and a grandfather who was, for the first time in years, actually getting better, the eviction became a piece of paper that meant nothing. Coates never bothered them again. Funny how that works. She kept baking. She'll tell you her mother's bread built that table, and she's right. But something changed about the mornings. Because Diesel McGraw did not disappear the way he had the first time. He rode back through Millbrook every few weeks, and then every few weeks after that, and somewhere in there a road-worn old biker with no family left became something like family to a girl who'd lost most of hers. He came for her birthday. He came at Christmas. He sat with Walt on the porch, and the two old men would talk for hours about nothing at all. And on his neck, in every kind of weather, he wore a gray hand-knit scarf, a little uneven near the end where a dying woman's fingers had gotten tired. He never took it off. Men in the club would ask him about it sometimes, this fearsome man and his soft gray scarf, and Diesel would just touch it and say, "A little girl gave me this on the day I'd quit. It's the reason I'm still here." And that would be the end of the conversation. Years later, when Callie was grown, somebody asked her if she'd known. If she'd had any idea that freezing morning what that scarf would do, what it would bring back to her tenfold and then some. And she said no. She said she wasn't thinking about any of that. She saw a man who was cold and she had something warm, and it really was that simple. That's the part people always want to complicate, she said. It isn't complicated. You see somebody in the cold, you give them what warmth you've got. You don't do the math on it, you just do it. She said her mother taught her that. She said her mother spent her whole short life taking care of people, and the last thing those tired hands ever made was a scarf to keep her daughter warm. And it kept her daughter warm, all right. Just not the way anybody planned. It went out into the sleet one gray morning and it caught a man who was falling. And it turned out there's no such thing as a small kindness. There's only kindness thrown out into the cold that you never get to see the whole shape of. 200 motorcycles found that out. So did a little girl selling bread by the highway. And so, I hope, did you.